Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our virtual live event here. I'm your host, John Robb. I'm joined by Jeff Ayers, Doug Lyle, Kathy Antrim, and we are so pleased to have our main guests of Lee Child and Andrew Child, of course, the backers of the Jack Reacher, talking about their latest book, Into Deep. So, Lee and Andrew, how you guys doing today? And thanks so much for coming.
Pleasure. Great to be with you. And yeah, what an exciting event.
Yeah, everything's great. Thank you for having us on as guests. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Doug, show the cover of the book.
Do I have to?
Yes, because we're gonna jump right in. I'm gonna put a chat. We're also gonna have in the chat, we'll have a buy link for the book if anybody wants it. But this is also hosted by Outliers Writing University. If you're not sure, go to outlierswritinguniversity.com. 24 live classes per year with teachers like Jeffrey Deaver. Maybe we'll get Lee and Andrew next year. You never know. Heather Graham, Allison Brennan, so many great best-selling authors teaching you how to write live. So make sure you check out outlierswritinguniversity.com to take your writing career up to that next level. And speaking of writing career, let's start out with Lee and Andrew and talk about the latest Reacher novel here, Into Deep. Let's hear what you guys got going on in this one.
I'm going to let Andrew answer this because this is a huge book for the two of us. That I wrote 24, then we wrote 4 together. Now Andrew's going to write the next 24. And Into Deep is the first of them. It's his book. I saw it as a finished product and my heart was in my mouth thinking, is this going to be any good? And it's fantastic. It's just the perfect Reacher novel. I don't know how he did it.
Well, thank you, Lee. I'm glad Lee likes it. I'm hoping that all of you guys like it as well. Yeah, and what I did with this one was we decided to just jump straight in and put Reacher in a really miserable situation. So the book starts with Reacher. He regains consciousness in a darkened room. He finds that he's handcuffed to a table. His wrist is broken and he has no memory of how he's got there. So the book starts out with Reacher not in the best frame of mind, and some people who have taken him there and attached him to this table. Fair to say that they are not going to be having a few good days following that.
Boy, I cannot wait to read this book. I'm very excited about it. So Andrew, are you on tour right now promoting the book?
I am, yeah. I'm in Scottsdale, Arizona right now. We've got an event tomorrow night. Tomorrow's launch day, so got an event at the Poison Pen, and actually it's a joint event with my wife Tasha Alexander. So we are going to have a real blast tomorrow. So if anybody is in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area, please do come join us.
That sounds like a great event. I wish I was going to be there. So I want to jump back a little bit and ask you guys about your childhood. And I want to also start with Lee on this and ask, how did your childhood, do you think, influenced developing Jack Reacher, and how much of Reacher is like who you were as a young man?
Well, my stock answer to that is it's purely autobiographical, except that I toned down the violence a little bit just to keep it more plausible. So it's a great question. How does one's childhood influence who you become? And it's going to be the same answer, but different from me and Andrew, because there's a large age gap. So essentially, I was a completely post-war baby. In fact, in 8 days, I turned 70, which means I was born in 1954. Which was, only 9 years after the end of the Second World War. And Britain in particular was just utterly dominated by World War II throughout my childhood. Up until the Beatles came along in 1963, everything was about World War II. And the physical landscape was ruined. I was born in a town called Coventry, which had been the first of those English cities to be destroyed by the Blitz. And so I was born in 54. My first reliable memories are probably 1957 or 8. And I remember playing in bomb sites, bombed out houses where you could swing from rafters and jump down to the cellar and all that kind of stuff. Those were our adventure playgrounds. And going along with that was just this grayness and exhaustion, and both physical, economic, moral. It seemed to us as kids that all the good stuff was in the past. We were hearing all these heroic, magnificent stories, which and you can't dispute it. You know, Winston Churchill said, "Our finest hour," and there's no question that it was. And so that we felt there was nothing for us. It was all in the past. It was all boring ahead until the 60s started, when we suddenly realized, yeah, there was something for us. So my entire life was really a fight between the old ways and the promise of something new. And my parents were kind of there was no question that you know, they'd had hard, horrible lives, and they had suffered tremendously, first the Depression and then World War II. You know, as an example, my mother's teenage years, the literal teenage years from 13 to 19, that was the Second World War. She never had a pair of new shoes as a teenager. And so they had had these rough lives, same as everybody. But then there was a fundamental split between adults at that time. Some who were really happy that we now lived in peace and the new generation could do what it wanted. But my parents were in the other camp. They were intensely jealous of that. They resented it. And so there was a fundamental moral fight the whole time. There was a cliche in Britain where the older generation would tut tut and they would say, "We didn't fight the war for the likes of this." And our point was, yes, you did. You fought for freedom, and this is what freedom looks like, whether you like it or not. So there was constant tension. It was boring. It was gray. And I used reading as an escape, you know, which is not unusual for that time because there was nothing else. There was very little TV. You could maybe go to the movies for the Saturday morning matinee. That was 9pence, I remember. But apart from that, there was zero entertainment other than reading. And it completely saved my life, created my life, enabled my life. If I was bored and fed up at home, I would get into a book and I could be anywhere doing anything. I could be a super person. And so I never got out of that habit. I just read and read and read, and that is what saved me. And it's also what created, obviously, what I did later.
You know, so I've heard a rumor that you were once a hooligan.
Total, yeah. I mean, it was
so tell us about that a little bit.
It was partly the times. You know, it was a big industrial city that I lived in, and emotionally extremely inarticulate. Everything was a physical fight. And we had the disadvantage that our parents were aspirational for us. They wanted to do well. They wanted us to get a great education. And if you're doing well at school, that just puts a big target on your back. And it was, you know, literally, and especially my secondary education. The British system is you do primary and then secondary. And I changed at the age of 10 to a very fancy school. That one of those ancient English schools founded in 1552. And I went there on a scholarship, and getting in and out of my neighborhood, it was a fight in the morning and then a fight in the afternoon to get back in. And I loved it. I was really good at it. I had a system in elementary school where, because, you know, my parents never gave me anything. And if I wanted a cookie or something like that, I operated a kind of mutual protection society. If the other kids gave me their cookies or something for lunch, then I would look after them. And I remember I had one rule, which is if you pull a knife on me, I will break your arm. And that's in the long run, that saved me a lot of trouble. I had to do it once or twice, but after that, they left me alone.
Wow. Well, how about you, Andrew? Is your experience similar or was it different than Lee's?
He's muted, still muted.
Is he?
There we go, unmuted, I hope. Yeah,
Okay.
I would say it was extremely similar, only updated by, a decade and a half, because the physical side of it, by the time I was out and about, by the time I was growing up in the 70s and the 80s, you didn't have the bomb sites anymore. Most of that stuff had been repaired. You would still see the gaps. You can walk down more or less any street in any big city in England, and you will see missing buildings still to this day, or buildings that don't match the other ones that are there because the original ones got bombed and they had to be rebuilt. So the physical environment was different. It wasn't as bleak. But the country was mired in a kind of, it lost its way. The country had to come to terms with no longer really being relevant on the world stage in the way that it had been. So no one really knew what to do. There were strikes constantly. There was all kinds of physical strife everywhere you went. But the thing about the aspirational side of our parents and the schools was exactly the same. We'd moved down close to London by this point, and I went to, the school I went to was even older. My school was founded in 942. And so I would have to walk, in my fancy school uniform past the local school in order to get to the bus to go to the town where the old school was. And so, yeah, it was the same thing. People would be waiting outside the school for you to go by. There'd be a fight leaving. Wednesdays, then there were extra fights because that was sports day. So you had to go from the school through this local park, Verulamium Park in St. Albans. And so then you had people from 3 or 4 schools who would come down. So Wednesdays, it would be a fight in the morning, a fight going to the sports ground, a fight coming back from the sports ground. My favorite one ever was a guy tried to run me down on his bike. So I flung him and his bike into the lake, which it seemed to get the point across. And then another fight on the way home. It was constant. And the thing was, it wasn't like today. I remember when my kids were at school, if there was a fight, the teachers were horrified, everybody was upset, but it was just taken for granted. I remember there had been one particular fight that got a little bit out of hand, so the school wrote to our parents to complain. And I remember my father, it was in the days where you had 2 deliveries of mail. One came very early in the morning. So he was sitting having breakfast and this letter arrived from the school. My father opened it. He had these very severe half-moon reading glasses. So he read the letter and then he glared at me over the top of these glasses. And he said in his harsh Belfast accent, he said, "Andrew, it says here that you've been fighting. Is this true?" So I said, "Yes, that it is." And he says, "Did you win?" So I said, "Yes, that I did." So he just screwed the letter up and threw it away.
That's great. Well, let me ask you this, Lee. Let's go back to early times. I've always felt that that Jack Reacher is basically a modern day Shane. I mean, it's basically the same thing. Come to town, fix things. Why did you originally, when you dreamed up this character, make him a U.S. military police rather than someone in the U.K.?
Well, it was a bunch of reasons for that, Doug. It was, well, first of all, yeah, Shane, but people think that Schaefer invented Shane, and he really didn't. I mean, the Western figure was imported from medieval Europe, that story had been imported from Scandinavian sagas, and before that Anglo-Saxon battle poems, and before that Greek stuff. You could even say religious myths, the sudden appearance of a savior. That character is really a sort of secular savior. And so what I was interested in was why. I mean, why does that figure show up consistently over thousands of years of narrative? And really the only rational explanation can be is that we crave it as people. We want that guy. Either we want to be that guy or we want to have that guy's help. And I still think that's true. I mean, all of us, everybody on this call, everybody listening and watching has some kind of a problem. Hopefully it is trivial. It could be extremely serious. Now, wouldn't it be great if some strong, silent person showed up at your door, took care of the problem, and then disappeared? So that there's no gratitude issues afterward or anything like that. It's just a problem-solving thing. It's irresistible. So I thought, number one, this is an irresistible character. And number two, it enabled me to explore sort of alienation and isolation. The key to Reacher, I think, is that he loves his solitude and he needs his solitude, but simultaneously he's really upset about being lonely. Is this constant tension, solitude versus loneliness. And I pursued that blindly because I had been working in the entertainment business before in television. And the one thing that I had learned is that you cannot plan a success. All success is accidental. It's a bit like Diane Arbus said about photographs. They always come out either better or worse than you think they're gonna. And so planning was not really an option because you would end up with a laundry list of imagined virtues and you'd really get granular about it. And you would say, well, you know, a lot of fiction is bought by women aged 49 to 64, so I got to appeal to them, but also I want to appeal to men in their 20s or whatever. If you go down that road, you are lost. You've just got to close your eyes and write. And that Reacher myth, the myth of the knight errant, the mysterious stranger, is what came out. Partly, I think I was psychologically trying to stay away from what other people were doing. Because just before I started, there had been another writer started, and I had read his early 2 or 3 books, and I could tell this guy is going to be a big star. And he was doing what you could roughly call an employment or location-based soap opera. And I had got no objection to soap opera. I worked 20 years in TV, and soap opera put the food on my table. Soap opera is an incredibly powerful narrative device, and I don't disparage it in any way. It's really difficult to do. And you've also got to acknowledge that soap opera audiences are pretty sophisticated, and they've got long memories. They can pick up strands that might be a month apart in terms of episodes. So, but I did not want to do what other people were doing. And the author that had impressed me was Michael Connelly. Mm-hmm. And so as a sort of mental shorthand, I wanted to do exactly the opposite of what he was doing. So no job, no home, no colleagues, no underlings, no bosses, no friends, no nothing. A very simple name instead of Hieronymus Bosch, a real simple name. Everything I wanted to stake out the opposite field from what Michael was doing as a representative of the upcoming generation. So Reacher just basically came out, and I didn't want to investigate him too much in the early days in case the bubble burst mentally for me. So, but many books in, I was secure enough, and I thought, so what is this exactly? And it is. It's Shane. It is Gawain and the Green Knight. It's Lancelot. It's everybody going all the way back to the beginning of narrative.
So Andrew, I have a question for you. Since you've worked on 5 novels now, how have you made Reacher your own?
Well, that's a great question. And the idea of who Reacher belongs to is fascinating, really, because he has changed so much over the years. And, you know, I remember way back when, you know, Lee mentioned that he had been working in television, then he got fired and decided he was going to take the really sensible step of making a living by writing books. I remember he sent me the manuscript of the very first one, Killing Floor. And it was a terrifying experience, honestly, reading that book, because I was going to have to tell him honestly if it was any good or not. And before I started reading it, I was thinking, well, what if it isn't? What if it's terrible? I'm going to have to not only call him up and tell him that, but then I'm probably going to have to send him food parcels or let him sleep on my spare room floor or something. So it was pretty terrifying. And I remember, you know, when I was at that point, the second person in the world to have encountered Reacher. And then over the years, of course, you know, now millions of people have. And you know, he really belongs to everyone. You know, part of there's a sort of transaction involved, isn't there? Because as a writer, you describe a certain amount of that character, you put a certain amount of it on the page, and then when the reader reads those words and the words are translated into an image in their head, they're doing a lot of the work too, because they are completing the picture. So, you know, Reacher is part of everybody. All of the people in the world who like Reacher, you know, there's a part of him that everybody has created. So I haven't really set out to change that. I haven't set out to take it away from Lee and turn it into something of mine. I just really want to continue that process of Reacher, starting off with 1, then 2, then 5, then, you know, wherever it is, whatever that number is today. Just trying to bring the character that we all know and we all love to the page every year, so that we can all visit with with an old friend, see what he's been up to, see what he's doing now. Bit like our father, who's Irish, he used to say the goal was to come up with something that was the same, only different. So I don't want Reacher changed. I don't want him to become, you know, a tree-hugging hippie. But at the same time, it's nice to show different sides of him. It's nice to show different aspects of him. So, for example, last year we did a prequel. We went back to a time when Reacher was in the army. So that's very fun to do, because you show him in a more structured environment, and also you show him a little bit younger, a bit more inexperienced, possibly even a little bit more naive. So you can show Reacher in different lights, but I really don't want it to be that he's different. When we first decided to do this, the idea that I had was that when it got to the point where I was writing the books on my own, I had this vision that on launch day, a diehard Reacher fan is racing to the bookstore to get their copy, but they get delayed on the way. They arrive just as the store is about to close its doors, and there's only one copy left, and that copy has been damaged. You know, the cover, the front cover, the back cover has been torn off. All that is left of the page story in it. So the person cannot see who the author is. They just know that it's the new Reacher book. And my dream would be that they would buy the book anyway. They would take it home. They would stay up all night reading it. And at the end, they would say, wow, just as good as it always was. Or, you know, even better than it always was. That would be great. But certainly not. Certainly not, oh, wow, now it's completely different. That is completely not what I want to do.
Yeah, that's my biggest fear, is that he's going to do it better than I did it. And there were, and he's selling himself short a little bit, because when we started out with the collaboration, we had no idea how to do it. I mean, neither of us works well with others at all. We didn't know what we were going to do. But we started out with a discussion, and I had one point to make, which was that I needed Andrew to help shove him into the future in terms of technology, because I am the world's worst person for technology. I just can't do it at all. And so Reacher was really backward. He barely knew what a cell phone was, let alone how to use one. And so I think that is a good thing to a certain extent. I think the reader likes it when the hero is not ahead of the reader in terms of understanding, because that makes the reader feel inadequate. So it's good to have the hero a little bit behind the curve technologically. But Reacher was like 100 years behind the curve. And so I said to Andrew, look, the one thing that we got to do with the first collaboration is move Reacher ahead a little bit so that it's not so grotesque. And Andrew can do that because he's good with technology, and I'm not. And then in turn, Andrew said to me, yeah, and what I want to do is bring Reacher back to when he actually talked a little bit, because really without realizing it at all. I mean, I was absolutely not aware of it, but over the 24 books, Reacher was getting terser and terser to the point where if I could do a 3-word dialogue for Reacher instead of 4, I loved that. And if the dialogue ran to a second line, it was practically like a filibuster. And I wasn't aware I was doing that or really why I was doing it. But Andrew said, hey, remember the earlier books where he would sound off at people in whole paragraphs and he would make fun of them and he would be sarcastic and he would use like words as weapons as well as his body. And I hadn't realized it. And I thought, yeah, that should happen. And so Andrew's reset that a little bit to where Reacher will talk sometimes an entire paragraph, which is amazing.
Fantastic. Hey, so I got a question here from the chat. This is from Ben. He says, whichever one wants to answer first, when you finish your manuscript, what are some of the techniques you use during your editing process to create an airtight story, and how many drafts do you usually end up with?
Well, I'll answer that first, and it's a horrible answer by the sound of it. People who go into it expecting to do a draft and then a lot of editing and have maybe 3, 4, 5 drafts before the final draft. I'm not one of those people. The end, when I finish typing, that is it. That is it's not only the first draft, but it's the only draft. I never change anything because, although that's not entirely true, because I had a process where whatever I'd done yesterday, that would be the first thing I would read. I would read through what I did yesterday, smooth it out a little bit, a bit of comma here, change a word there, and then plow on to the new bit. So it was a churning process, like 2 steps forward, 1 step back continuously. So you could either say that my finished product was the first and only draft, or you could say it was like the 80th draft because I checked it every day. So somewhere in between, but I never ever intended that I would dash off a first draft and then fix it. That was never the idea. My idea was do it once and do it right. And again, I got the storytelling part of it was that the story was what it was. I was just making it up on the spot and this was happening. And to go back and change it is fundamentally dishonest, I felt. It's like real life. You can't change what happened in the past. You can't gloss it over to make it more convenient for you. You got to deal with it. And my editor would often say, wouldn't it be better if this happened after that? And I would say, yeah, but it didn't.
Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, well, my goal, as I was saying previously, was to, is to come up with books that sound and feel and look just the same as the ones that Lee wrote. And so it seemed to me that the best way to do that would be to use the same process. So I do them in the same way. I will every day read back what I did the day before and then try to make decisions in real time for what Reacher's going to do, what the bad guys are going to do, rather than planning it out way in advance and outlining and giving yourself a kind of safety net. It forces you to make those decisions, to be bold, and to, if you have done something a few days before that has put Reacher in a really awkward situation, well, that's too bad. You've just got to work harder to get him out of that situation. You don't go back and cheat by making it that he wasn't locked in that room after all, or that it turned out that he had a gun hidden in his sock or something. Whatever you set up, you live with the consequences. And I've found many times over the years, not just with Reacher, but with my previous books, that when you put yourself in the tightest of corners, that's when you have to do your best work to get out of it. So, I think with thrillers, one thing that it is legitimate to look back on and work on a little bit is that, you want the things that happen to be a surprise to your audience, right? But the thing is, they're not a surprise to you because you thought of it in the first place. So it is useful to have somebody who can look at it and say, yeah, this one here I saw coming, you need to make it more oblique. This other one, it came out of the blue, too much, you know, you need a bit more of a hint. Things like that I think can be useful. But I'm the same as Lee in that I don't do multiple drafts. I'll basically do one that has been tweaked and improved as I go, and then anything that needs to be improved to make it make sense or make it more understandable or make it smoother or better, then I will do. But you know, not 5 or 6 different drafts, each one completely different to the previous one.
Nice. So Kate and her mom are on here and they're huge fans, lifelong huge fans, and they would love to know, what was your favorite Reacher book to write and why?
Gosh, that's well, first of all, thank you, Kate and her mom, for being fans. And which was my favorite to write? In a way, I would say probably Gone Tomorrow, which was that's the one that starts out with an apparent suicide bomber on the subway in New York. And I was thrilled with that opening because it was the first opening I'd ever actually got off the internet. You know, I said I was really a Luddite, and I was. But when I wrote that book, I just started browsing the internet like people do. And you know what it was like, especially earlier on, you would end up down all kinds of rabbit holes. And I ended up on this site that was for the London police people. It was a message board for them, and they all posted under false names so that they could basically say what they wanted. And somehow I got in there, and it had just been after the terrorist bombings in London, where the transportation system was attacked with numerous casualties. They called it 7/7. It was the 7th of July, and it was our version of 9/11 essentially. And what happened was, very shortly afterward, they pursued this suspected Palestinian or Middle Eastern terrorist down into the subway in London. And he was unresponsive when they approached him. So they shot him dead. And it turned out that he was actually not a terrorist from the Middle East at all. He was an electrician from Brazil. And so it was an absolute catastrophe. And on this message board, they were talking about it. How can this have happened? You know, they were extremely penitent about it and very ashamed. How did this happen? And the theory was it was because of the list. And the list was capitalized, capital L. So then I set about hunting down, what is this list? And I eventually found it in a local police department in Minnesota. They had published it on their website as a kind of public information thing. It was a list of the visual and behavioral signs of a suicide bomber. And there were 11 characteristics for a woman and 12 for a man. And I read them and I just thought, this is fantastic. This is the beginning of a book. And so that part, the suicide bomber on the subway, that got me through the first, I don't know, 40, 50 pages. And then the rest of it was all about just making it up, desperately trying to live up to that opening. And I think it came out good, and I certainly loved writing that because I was living in New York. It was set in New York. At one point, Reacher is getting on the subway, and he passes by this girl with a little black and white dog. That's my daughter. She used to walk her dog every night, and so it was a very personal book to me. But it was also, and it was a great opening that was just gifted to me, and I remember writing that book every day just with a sense of joy, even though it's a dark book. That's something I've noticed about myself. The darker the book, the more I enjoy writing it. And if I'm in a good mood that year, the book comes out, generally speaking, quite mild. And if I'm in a bad mood that year, it comes out, you know, mayhem. So the whole combination took me probably about 90 working days to do that book, and I loved every one of them.
Yeah, and there's one thing about that book I particularly like, which is that the villain is a woman called Lila Hoth. And Lee actually stole that character name from my daughter, Catherine. So she'd been doing a writing exercise at school. Lee came to visit, and Catherine was telling her about this. And Lee said, "Oh, okay, that sounds like a great exercise you're doing. What are the characters?" So she said, "Lila Hoth," and he said, "Right, I'm stealing that." And it showed up in the book. So I always love it from that point. But I think my favorite one to write was last year's book, The Secret, and the reason for that is that the villains we had in that book were just so much fun to write. You know, without sounding pretentious about it, it was one of those times where you come up with the idea for some characters and they just come to life on the page in front of you. They start doing stuff that you weren't expecting. They just become bigger and wilder and crazier and more outrageous. So I had an awful lot of fun with the villains. I'm going to say who they are, but in case somebody hasn't read that yet, but working on those villains was really, really fun.
Yeah, the scenario for that book really showed how instinctively on the same page we were, because that was still one of the collaborative books, and so it was going to start with a discussion. And I was obsessed with that news story coming out of Russia at the time, that all these well-dressed executives were mysteriously falling from high floor windows. And I thought, God damn, that's irresistible. We got to do something with that. And so I was all ready to go into the discussion promoting that idea. And Andrew was feeling exactly the same thing. He'd seen the same stories, and it was like, oh, we got to do something about that. And so, yeah, I mean, Andrew did all the work on that book, but vicariously, I enjoyed writing that one too.
So here's another question for you that we got from emailing. If not writing in first person, how to decide when the MC expresses and shows versus what the narrator explains? This is definitely a craft question.
Yeah, well, that's, again, I don't want to sound too academic about it, but you've got to go back to Flaubert, I think the French novelist in the 19th century, who was the first really to pioneer a way of third-party narration that as you switch scenarios or as you switch from character to character, the narration modified very subtly so that you were leaning into whatever the character was taking first place during that scene. The narrator almost became that character in that sense. And so for me, what I used to do is, it was just a gut feeling at the beginning. Is this a first-person book, or is this, in fact, a third-person book? And typically that was because of a very early thought, you know, do we need to start with some bad guys doing something bad? And if you do, then obviously that's a third-person book, because the hero or the main character is not observing that. If the first scene, like Gone Tomorrow that I just mentioned, if the first scene is the main character immediately dealing with something, that could be first person. But for me, it was just always an instinctive choice. Third person, I think, is dramatically easier in two ways. Number one, you can build tension much easier because you can have the meanwhile back at the ranch situation. You can set up a thing where the hero is walking down the street and the reader knows that there's a man with a gun waiting around the corner. Well, that is automatic suspense. You can't achieve that in first person. Also, first person is difficult to stay on the side of reasonable non-egotism. You know, a first person book, it's full of I did this, I did that. And there are certain things that are very hard to describe in first person. You know, it's perfectly easy to say, Doug Lyle, handsome man, women love him. You can say that. You cannot say, hey, I'm a handsome guy, women love me. You can't say that. So that first person boxes you in different ways. I think third person is more liberating. But on the other hand, first person is a much more immediate and instinctive connection with the reader. It's how we all describe our the events of our day. You know, you go home, you tell your partner, I did this, I did that. You don't refer to yourself in the third person unless you're a seriously weird politician.
Andrew.
Yeah, I think the thing with that is that you've got to start off with the character and the story, figure out what kind of story you want to tell, and then the decision whether it's going to be third or first will follow automatically from that. I think it's a mistake to do it the other way around, because then you're kind of putting the author front and central instead of the character and the story. You know, I've never set out to say, oh, this time I want to do first person, or this time I want to do third. I've always set out thinking of what the opening scene is going to be, and then deciding how best to tell the little piece of the story that is unfolding in that scene. And so sometimes it calls for one, sometimes it calls for the other. And so I don't go in with any preconceptions. I just go in and see which is going to serve the story that I want to tell better.
So I got a couple of these same questions are you guys outliers, or are you just seat of the pantsers? And how you write?
I was basically naked. I mean, not even the seat of my pants. It was, literally, I can remember numerous books where I always started on September the 1st, which was partly a sentimental anniversary because that's when I started my first book, but also partly sensible mechanics. If you're going to publish a book a year, you got to write a book a year. Therefore, you got to have some structure in your year. Therefore, starting on the same day seemed sensible. So I would always start September the 1st, and without fail, middle of August, I would think I've got nothing. I can't think of anything. I'm done. I'm washed up. It's over. And then toward the end of August, I'd start to get the glimmer of an idea, maybe for an opening. And then on the 1st of September, I'd have a good first sentence. And I would type it out, and I would sit back, light a cigarette, and think, all right, now what would be a good second sentence? And I would continue. Typically, one of my manuscripts has got 11,000 lines in it, and I would continue making that same, all right, what next? 11,000 times. And so I don't know if that even qualifies as seat of the pants. You know, that's bare skin on the chair.
Andrew, what about you?
Well, certainly since I've been working with Lee, then I've shifted to that method. I was never one of the uber outliners. You know, some people like to, you know, more or less, you know, some people will write 50, 60,000 word outlines and then flesh them out into the final novel. I never went to that kind of extreme, but when I was writing my previous books, I would try and figure out a little bit more about where they were starting, where they were going, how they were going to get there. Particularly when I did the Cooper Devereux books in Birmingham, Alabama, because I always had 3 storylines in those that had to intertwine, and I never wanted there to be consecutive chapters that were about the same storyline, so that they needed a little bit more planning. But now I've shifted completely to, you know, if I want my books to sound the same as Lee, I feel like I have to write them the same. And when we started, the first one we did together, The Sentinel, you know, I'd heard him a million times saying that he didn't outline and he just did one line after another. And I secretly thought, well, you know, he must be exaggerating. He must have a bit more of an idea than that. So the first time that we finished the first scene in the Sentinel, we got it so that we were happy with it. And I remember saying, okay, so what happens next? Thinking that he would secretly know. And he said, I've got no idea. And he really didn't. And I was really, really taken aback by that. And a couple of times during that book, I thought, well, you know, it's my first time out doing this. I want to try and stay ahead of the game. And I'd try to kind of secretly sketch out a few future scenes. And none of them wound up in the book because the direction you go in was just not one that could ever be anticipated. It always had to be what felt right in the moment. So yeah, I gave up doing that because it was a waste of time.
And it was really, I've done a few collaborative stories, especially for ITW, actually. You know, ITW funds itself through publications, and some of them are concepts where two authors will get together, bring their two characters into the same story. And numerous times I would do that with well-known ITW authors, and I would send off a chunk and they would say, all right, what do you think happens next? And that was a question that just stumped me completely. I don't know what's going to happen next. You do your bit and then we'll see. But it just shows you that if you take 100 writers, you've got about 350 different ways of doing it. And it's so unique, so individual how it's done, that I'm not sure that it's much use listening to advice like that. I mean, people say to me, what advice have you got for writing? And my honest answer is my main advice is ignore my advice, because it's your book, not mine. And the only way it's going to work is if it has an organic quality, a beating heart of its own. Then it's a vivid book, then it's alive. It might be terrible, but at least it's alive. If you listen to advice, if you say to yourself, I really want to do this, but John Grisham does that later in the book, and Stephen King does it earlier, and Lee Child doesn't do it at all. If you start going down that road, you're lost. It has got to be your own work. And so you've got to find one of those numerous ways of doing it that suits you.
So can we kind of make the headline that the brothers write naked too? Can we make that? That's the headline we're going to put in there. But hey, Jeff's got a question. So I'm going to flip it over. Jeff, what do you got?
So Amazon Prime season 3 premieres in December of Reacher. Season 4 just got an early renewal, so congrats on that.
Mhm.
How did it move from the Tom Cruise films to the Amazon Prime series that Nick Santora worked on?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's December for season 3. I think it's going to possibly be next spring. I'm not sure. Amazon has such a wealth of data that they don't reveal that it makes some kind of sense to them, some particular date, and it's impenetrable to us. But it'll be, within a few months for season 3. And I mean, the answer to what you said is that a lot of movie deals, certainly my movie deal with Tom Cruise, was an old deal. That particular Cruise deal was done in 2005, when there was effectively, if you wanted it on the screen, it had to be a feature film, because streaming, binging television had not been invented yet. And I think the point is that now, this is what, almost 20 years later, no sensible author would opt for a feature film over streaming television, simply because of the running time that you've got. A feature film is about 90 minutes of content, whereas with a streaming season, you've got 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, whatever you want. And so that makes it a lot more accommodating to what's actually in the original book. There's time for everything, the slow bits, the quiet bits, the touching bits. You can get it all in, whereas movies are cut so ruthlessly that you really can't. And so it wasn't really like necessarily a choice like A or B. It was that in 2005, features were all you had. I'm convinced that if streaming television had been around forever, nobody would ever look for a movie deal, because it's so much more satisfying to do it in a long form. So what happened specifically was that for some reason in the contract, I had a veto after 2 movies that whether we would make any more. And I loved working with Cruise. He was a fun guy. None of what you hear about him is true. He's a terrific guy, and good fun to hang out with and work with, and very interesting to work with. He is a great theoretician of storytelling. Typically what happens with a movie, it's planned, it's rehearsed and so on. But even so, you still have a little conversation at the beginning of every scene when you're about to shoot a scene. And Cruise's question was never, how do I make myself look good in this scene? It was always, how better can we tell the story in this scene? to the point where often he was giving away good lines to co-stars because it seemed to work better for the story. To the point where at one time I remember we said to him, Tom, this is a Tom Cruise movie. Don't give all your damn lines away. And so he was good fun to work with, but partly because of the constraint of the running time and partly because of the constraint of Cruise's physical appearance, it was just misfiring just a little bit, especially for the people that had been readers who then turned to the movies. They just couldn't make sense of it. And one thing I learned in showbiz is that when the audience tells you something, you should listen. And so after 2 movies, I said, no, we're not going to do any more. We'll go to television. And ultimately, at first it was Netflix that was pursuing it. And then Amazon joined the chase. And again, something I learned in showbiz is go where the love is. And Amazon just really wanted it. And it's a joy to work on because it's a huge cast and a huge crew and many hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on it. But these people are basically fans. They're fans of the Reacher series and they want to do it right. And that makes it just really pleasant to work on. The detail, is bizarre. I'm a consultant on the show as well as an executive producer, and I'll get constant inquiries. I once got an email with a picture of a shoe, and the question was, would Reacher wear a shoe like this? It's that level of attention they have.
So it's past September 1st. It's now October 21st when we're doing this. The book comes out tomorrow. So you're already into a major milestone, which is 30th year is the next book. And I want to know if, Andrew, if you have anything massive planned, that's going to go on for the 30th anniversary of Reacher now?
Well, it's what a wonderful time to be involved because, as you say, the 30th book, that is just incredible. So it's an absolute honor to be involved with that. As you pointed out with the dates, we are into the writing process already. Reacher 30 has been started. It's going really well so far. And I don't know the specifics, but I'm being told that the marketing teams and the publicity teams in the US and in the UK have got some pretty good stuff planned for throughout the year, I believe. So I think we're going to be seeing some really, really good imaginative stuff over the next few months.
Lee, anything?
I look back and, I wrote the first book on spec, obviously, and you send it to an agent and the agent tries to sell it. And we got a 2-book deal on that first go round. And I remember thinking, great, that's 2 years before I got to get another job. And, and then another and another. And, fairly recently, I've realized I won't have to get another job, which means because I am retired now or trying to be, and I look back on it. What a gift it was. I have worked, I don't know, 40, 45, 50 years or whatever, and every single day I've enjoyed it. I have never ever dreaded going to work, and look around at the people around you. How rare is that? My dad opted for safety, a safe civil service job with a pension, and he hated every single day of his working life. And I've loved every single day of mine. And so that is just the greatest privilege to have. And early on, I was broke, desperate. I was out of work, and it was a financial contract that mattered to me. And then, happily, quite quickly, it became I could pay my bills, no problem. And it became an emotional contract with the reader. They were paying me this gigantic compliment of A, reading the book, and B, enjoying it. There is nothing better for an author. You all know this. There is nothing better to think you've done something that somebody else has enjoyed. And so I owe it all to the readers. And I'm really happy that Andrew has taken over because they're just as good, and the reader will get them now for many, many more years.
Well, Lee, I have to ask you this. I remember it's probably 7 or 8 years ago now. We were sitting in the bar at the Hyatt in New York, and I said, "So what's going on?" And you said, "Oh, I think I'm about done with this." I said, "Done with what?" He said, "Done with writing and Reacher and all that stuff." I said, "No, it's not ever going to happen." Of course, that was what, probably now 6 or 7 or 8 books ago. But I said, "Well, you won't quit writing. Is there something you've always wanted to do that you never did because this was the ongoing train?" And I remember you said, "I'd like to write a literary novel." In your retirement, is that still noodling in the back of your brain?
Well, I'm sure it's exactly the same for you, that you do what you do, and you probably have a kind of penumbra of 99 other ideas that you would like to do. And I've got those. I mean, I've floating around in my head, I've probably got 99 stories I would like to tell. But there are two very separate segments to writing, especially for me. The preferable half is lying horizontal on the sofa, daydreaming, which is always difficult to convince people that you're working when you're doing that, but you totally are. That is the
Yes.
That is the meat and potatoes of it, just making it up. And then the second half is the business. You've got to sit there and type it out. You got to promote it and all that kind of stuff. And that is the disincentive. The idea of dreaming it up, absolutely. I do that constantly, 24/7. Will I actually ever put anything down on paper? I'm not sure. We shall see. I've got a secret plan, actually, that is to write a Reacher book and give it to Andrew he can have a year off and publish it under his name and see if anybody notices the difference.
Clever.
Absolutely love that.
Go ahead, Kathy.
So yeah, so In Too Deep is the current novel, and I know that people can buy it starting tomorrow anywhere books are sold. And can you give us a little teaser about what you're working on now, or is still just really the infant stages?
Well, it's still pretty early stages, but and I'm not sure how much they want us to reveal, honestly, because we have a title, we have a concept, but I think with it being the 30th anniversary, I think that as part of the big plans that they have, I think we probably shouldn't say too much.
Oh, that makes sense. Well, I guess we'll have to wait. Lee and Andrew, it has been just fabulous having you both. You are amazing. And we've got to have you back when time allows, because it's just really educational, and so enjoy having you on.
Thank you.
We'll do this again for the 30th.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
We would love that.
That'd be great.
So again, guys, hey, thank you so much for joining, everybody. Big round of applause for Lee and Andrew to take an hour out of their day here to share a little bit about Jack Reacher and share a little bit about In Too Deep. Don't forget to go buy the book wherever books are sold, in whatever format you want it, you can get it. Audio, paperback, hardcover. You probably get it in a handwritten form. Sure, somebody did that. So you want to make sure that you go out there and check them all out. And real quick before we leave, people can buy In Too Deep, and they don't need to know Killing Floor or whatnot, because these books are pretty much all standalones. It's like, this is what's going on at his time at this point. And would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's absolutely what I wanted to do, was because it's fatal if somebody hears about the 8th book in a series and somehow they feel they got to start with book number 1. Maybe they can't find it, maybe it's not stocked or whatever. And it's also about Reacher's character. Reacher is not interested in what happened yesterday. He's not interested in what's going to happen tomorrow. It's all about today. So each book is a completely separate standalone story where you don't need any previous information, and you just dive in, and it's exactly like being Reacher. This is your day. This is what happens today.
Yeah. Fantastic. Hey, so again, thank you guys. Outliers Writing University. Check us out. Live interactive classes. Learn from the best. You might be on here on your 30th anniversary. We're going to talk about you, about your character. So like Lee said, and Andrew said, make your book your own. That's what you got to do. So thank you so much, guys. Again, In Too Deep, fabulous book. I read it, and the review is Sarah should have it soon. So thank you guys again.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
We'll be with you today.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much.